himself
I
too.
think so. I think so.
If he had a chance,
I think so.
later on,
Yes.
I mean, how can you kill 17 folks and live?
Yes. Absolutely.
Really. I mean, if you have a chance to sort of get out of that, but that's a terrible thing. I mean, it's okay, but we're ready, yeah,
Okay,
yeah. Because
okay.
I know when you talk about despair and all those, I mean,
Okay.
it adds a different dimension,
Okay.
a psychological thing
Good.
in terms of what we're
Good.
talking about, and I really appreciate that
Well,
to talk
thank you.
about some of the things. Thank you and welcome back to the second segment of the show for today. We're talking to Dr. CPoe, and he's giving us some information in reference to dreamers and gun violence. And of course, Dr. Poe, I think when we had our first segment, you gave us background information. So let's start off by giving you a free opportunity to talk about gun violence, immigration, dreamers, and that kind, all of those kind of things that come together that promotes, in a real sense, I think you're indicating, gun violence.
Yes. Now, I want to just make some comments about despair. Now, despair is a condition that probably affects more the subconscious than the conscious, even though there are manifestations in the conscious mind of a person who's in a condition of despair. Now, despair is defined as a sense of hopelessness, helplessness, worthlessness, and oftentimes if a person is in a condition of despair, they'll have an urge to take their own life and or an urge to take the life of somebody else. Now, I think that mass shooters, by and large, are in a state of despair, and I think that being in a state of despair has a tendency to cause them to become delusional, having false thoughts, and to believe then that somebody else is a threat to them. It may be a religion, it may be someone of the opposite party, or it may be an ethnic group. You recall the shooter, Dylan Roof, that went into the church and killed 9 people. His delusion was that he felt that Afro-Americans were taking over the country, and therefore his effort was to kill in order to prevent that from happening. As I was about to say, that despair may manifest itself, for example, as addiction. It may manifest itself as violent fantasies. I recall that Nicholas Cruz bragged about having guns, bragged about shooting up the school, bragged about killing animals, and the couple that took him in knew he had an AR-15, but they also believed that he wasn't a violent kind of person. So I believe that Cruz eventually would have committed suicide. And I want to say that if a person is in a condition of despair, they are more likely to be primarily suicidal, much more than homicidal. Except when the delusion kicked in that they feel threatened, then they are likely to become homicidal.
To eliminate the threat that they feel.
To eliminate the threat. To eliminate the threat.
That makes
and
sense.
by the way, psychosis is one manifestation of despair. People who are psychotic oftentimes hear voices. They feel threatened by those voices, or they may also see things, and they also will manifest bizarre or unusual behavior. So there are many manifestations of despair. Now, one other manifestation is rage and bitterness. People who are in a condition of despair are often bitter, and they have trouble controlling their anger. So I want to make those points quite clear, that in a condition of despair, a person is more often suicidal than homicidal.
You know, and of course, Dr. Poe, I see where gun violence can fit into what we're talking about here, because these are the folks that become so overcome with despair that, as you indicated, that they're suicidal.
Yes.
And they don't mind if you're going to take your own life.
Yes.
Another life does not matter at all to you.
Yes.
Is that what we're saying?
Yes.
Well, now, Dr. Poe, if we think in terms of despair and people who are caught up from a psychological point of view in reference to despair, then the argument that this was a mental problem, not a gun problem. Now deal with that, because because I think that when we talk about, and especially when we talk about trying to put limitations upon the ownership of guns and et cetera, a lot of folks say that it's not the gun problem, it's a mental problem.
Right.
And being in a state of despair brings about a mental problem. So would you say that Cruz was affected not with a mental problem, but the access that he had to guns made it very possible for him to do what he did?
Well, I think it's a combination of both.
Okay.
He obviously had some mental health issues, okay? But it's also, he also should not have been able to purchase an AR-15, okay? An automatic weapon, and plus the fact that he had quite a bit of ammunition on him. So he should not have been able to purchase that gun with the history of some mental health issues. So I think it's a combination of both, not just mental illness, but also a combination of access to guns. And so, and that's why it's so disheartening that the Florida legislature would vote against a ban on assault weapons.
Out of all things, and that seems to be an easy vote, because there are not many things that you can use an assault weapon for. And an AR-15.
Yes.
I mean, why? I mean, that's almost like you destroy a tank almost with something like that. And,
Yes,
and
yes.
to have that, speak to that.
Well, I think that part of the problem has been recognized, and that is, I think the NRA donated about $30 million to Trump's re-election campaign.
216.
216?
Yeah.
216 million?
Million to, yeah,
Oh, really?
that's right.
Really?
That's how much,
Really?
yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
And also, and so I think that the NRA has a kind of a chokehold on the Congress, and so on a lot of their representatives as well as the senators. And so I think that was the reason why the Florida legislature refused to vote to ban or even to take up the issue of assault weapons.
Okay, and of course, we're going to take our second commercial break, and we'll be back with our audience, excuse me, following this very, very short commercial break. All those children went out to Florida, and the state. See, the thing about it is that children have parents, and if you've got all these young people that are involved with concern, the young people influence their parents.
True.
And so, in a real sense, I think that this is a movement that might be able to undermine some of those individuals that are in Congress, because if they are 15, 16 years old, they can't vote. But if they are interested and they raise enough sand around the house and et cetera, it becomes a part of what the parent.
Amen.
You see, and the parents can vote.
Yes,
You see, and I
that's
think
true.
that this is happening in some of the cities, some of the elections that we're having here. Thank you and welcome back to the final segment of the show for today. We're talking to Dr. CPoe, and he's talking about dreamers and guns. And of course, Dr. Poe, let's see if we can pick up during this final segment dealing with the efforts to try to deal with all of the guns that we have, either from a mental point of view or from a psychological point of view, however you wish to deal with it.
Now, I understand that there were about 42,000 suicides in 2016. But usually the suicide rate is lower than the homicide rate. And so I believe that there's a relationship between despair and gun violence. So there are a whole lot of people who are victimized as a result of homicide as well as suicide, because oftentimes people who kill themselves leave a legacy of self-blame on the surviving family members. Oftentimes the family members ask the question, I wonder if I could have avoided it. I wonder if I could have prevented it. So of course now that is also true of homicides. The incidence of gun violence, gun-related violence, is very, very high in our society. And so we need to do something about guns. We need to make people who have a history of mental illness not able to purchase guns. We need to enact legislation which will make people who have a criminal background not able to purchase guns, because the violence that's committed in this country, both on the suicide level as well as on the homicide level, is just staggering.
And it's all connected with the availability of guns.
Absolutely.
You see, and the power of all of these guns.
Yes.
It seems that there's so much opposition, and people talk about the Second Amendment to the Constitution and that you must have a gun and et cetera. But I don't think this, well, you know, I've got some views in reference to the Second Amendment, but I don't think the Second Amendment would allow you to take a gun to a college classroom, you know, after having been in a college classroom yourself.
Yes.
You know how threatening it would be to be able to teach a group of students, and knowing that any one of the 30 or 35 that you might have might be armed. You see, but I think that, as a matter of fact, I think Tennessee is talking about doing the personal carry arm.
Yes, that's true. And I think the NRA's position is that everybody ought to have a weapon. Okay, unfortunately, that's their position. I want to say a word about dreamers. I think it's very sad that the Congress and or the president can't come up with a pathway to citizenship without tying in to billions of dollars for the border wall.
Border wall.
I also think that, I also am informed that they want to end the chain migration thing. And so it's really sad. It's very sad and very disheartening to recognize that the Congress and or the president can't find a way to allow these persons a path to citizenship.
Especially that chain migration idea that you're
Right.
talking about. I think this is the idea that will allow a person who's here to reach back to another country and bring one of his
Family
or her
members.
family members there.
Absolutely.
And that's the way immigration has worked all along. I mean, we put a name to it now, call it the chain migration and relationship migration and et cetera. But that was a standard way that immigration was carried out. A person who will leave a country, arrive in the United States of America, establishes himself or herself, can now look back over and bring and from the very early beginning of immigration to the United States of America, it has been that system. And now we want to change that?
Yes. These people were brought over as children, in many cases, due to no fault of their own, brought over by their parents who were undocumented. And so to send them back to their country of origin, most of them have no relationship at all to the country of origin. It's just cruel.
Well,
I mean,
now,
it's just cruel.
yeah, well, now, I would think in terms of African Americans in this country. You know, we
Yes.
became citizens after the 13th and the 14th Amendment gave us
Right.
citizenship.
Right.
But now, how would it be to any of us to think now that somebody would come and say, well, you know, you're in the United States of America, but what, we're going to send you back to your country.
Right.
If everybody went back to his or her country,
Yes.
then the only people that would be around here would be people who are native
Right.
to the United States of America. And so I think that I think that that's a very, very important consideration that we
Yes.
have to understand where people came from. We all came from somewhere.
That's true.
And we're here now, and now we want to what? Build the wall to keep people out, or drop the ability for them to bring their relatives, and then who are we going to bring here to this country?
True, true. Well, it seems as if maybe Trump would like to allow people from Norway to come in, okay? And of course, that suggests that there may be a racial bias there.
It's obvious that there's a
Yes,
racial bias
yes.
in there.
And let me also go back to gun violence just a moment. People in a condition of despair are most likely to crave attention, okay? And I think that Nicholas Cruz did in fact say things and do things to crave attention. As a matter of fact, I'm convinced that he would eventually commit suicide because when a girl broke up with him that he was seeing, he started cutting himself, okay? And oftentimes we see that in females and males who've been severely abused early on in life. They have a cutting addiction. They tend to cut themselves.
That's all psychological thing.
Yeah,
Is that it?
yes. I mean, yes. I mean, but it's like if you're in a condition of despair, you just want to hurt yourself, and or you want to hurt other people. I mean, because of the bitterness, because of the anger, because of the rage. So I think he would have eventually taken himself out. He would have eventually committed suicide if he wasn't arrested.
And so in a real sense, we have a real problem in this country, Dr. Poe,
Absolutely.
in terms of trying to, and this is the problem of recent origin,
Yes.
too, because this immigration has never been a real problem in terms of the United States of America, and now it's something where people are trying to send people out and raise fences and not allow people to bring their relatives, close relatives. These were very, very close relatives, mothers, fathers, and sisters and brothers, and et cetera. And so I think that it's that kind of idea that is very, very, it's not America.
Right. True.
It's not America, because America has been open, and each group that comes here has a place here. And so, well, yeah, anyway, we've got about a minute and a half left, Dr. Poe, but I just want to thank you for bringing that information, and I think it gave me a better understanding in terms of the health aspects of gun violence. You see that if somehow we can deal with the problems of health, but even with whatever problems of health we deal with, we're going to still have 5 or 6 guns for every person in the world. So we got to do something about guns.
Absolutely. And I think that despair makes people more prone to be violent towards themselves and or violent towards others. But people who are in despair are much more likely to be suicidal. They're much more likely to harm themselves than someone else.
Very good. And of course, Dr. Poe, let me thank you for bringing that excellent information, and to apologize for not being able to get in touch with you over the last several months. You see, because I think that you bring a very, very important understanding to some of the issues that we have to deal with, and I want to thank you for that. And let me encourage our audience to tune in again next week for another informative edition of Comments. Thank you, and